What's going on, everybody? This is Nick Gomez Cologne,
Nikos Myrogiannis Koukos.
and welcome back to yet another episode of Out of This World. In this podcast, we're going to be doing a deep analysis talking about the bigger and smaller picture meanings of the planets by Holst. And today is a very exciting episode because we'll be talking about what might be Nikos and I's favorite movement, Jupiter, the bringer of Jollity.
And I believe that Jollity is kind of infectious because we have it right now, and what we want to do is give it to you by talking about those beautiful elements that is in their music, and talk about how the title of the piece, "The Bringer of Jollity," is closely associated with the music and all the things that are here and there, and make it really jolly.
Yeah, so just like every other episode, how this is going to work is Nikos and I have some notes prepared and some thoughts that we want to share with you. We just finished listening to this particular movement, and as always, the particular score and the particular recording that we're using for this analysis will be available in the description below. So you want to follow along with us, or you want to go back and watch our thoughts after the fact, then you can go ahead and, as always, we highly recommend that you listen to The Planets if you not have heard it before. It's a beautiful piece of music, and as I said, this is our personal favorite movement of the work, so we're going to have a lot to talk about here today. So, kind of jumping right into it, we have the bringer of Jollity. So if you've been following us in our previous episodes, we've been talking about the bringer of war, we've been talking about the bringer of peace, the winged messenger, and now we have the sense of jollity, the sense of joyfulness. And we really have quite a bit happening in the score that suggests this idea of jollity. First and foremost, we have the overall chord structure of a lot of what we have happening here. It's very common in like music theory and music analysis, especially in more diatonic analysis, to be presented with the idea that major thirds and major sixths, even minor thirds and minor sixths, depending on how you look at it, are like the happy chords. They're the happy intervals because they have more of a brighter, more warm sound, and you need those type of chords present for any type of major or happy sounding chords.
And that is really reinforced by the fact that the registration and the nature of the chord, like the texture of the chord, is a close, like tight-knit one, like small intervals and moving very fast, especially in the beginning. And that is initiating the entire idea. We start in C major. That's our first key for the piece. And it's really giving us the idea that we're going somewhere by doing. So Nick was talking about the harmony. I'm gonna talk a little bit about the rhythms. There are many syncopation. The piece is fast, like the tempo indicated at the beginning is allegro giocoso, like a sweet and joyful fast tempo, and many instruments are taking part in this. The violins and the string family in general is serving as the underlying carpet at first, and the horns are taking it away with a kind of melodic material that is just giving us the first emotional response to what we should be feeling according to the composer, which is kind of jollity, not for itself like just happiness, but a very rigorous, a very fast happiness, you might say.
Yeah, absolutely. And like right off the bat, like with the use of these specific harmonic devices and the spreading of the orchestra that Holst has, like we're immediately given more like a narrative feeling because obviously even people who aren't like music students or avid music fans, like they'll be able to distinguish like a major chord as, oh, this is happy, or a minor chord as, oh, this sounds sad. So right away we're presented with pretty much everything that we need to have that happy sound. We have these like fast moving chords, we have these strong major chords, and any interval that's not like a third or sixth, such as like a fourth or fifth, they resolve to some type of like happy sounding chord. And being in C major, which is a very bright key that a lot of like upbeat works are in, especially for orchestral music, we're presented with this immediate idea of happiness and almost this lightness, which we saw in comparison to the third movement, which is the winged messenger.
So there is the same rigorous motion with the winged messenger, but this is heavier, not in a way that is sad, but in a way that it's actually much more happening, and you as an audience member in a live, especially in a live performance of the piece, you would be really aware of that, and that's probably the effect that the composer would like you to get into your brain right away. He's shifting eventually to more melodic themes, like the one that pa 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 but that is actually the byproduct of this whole build-up. Like that is the actual joyful moment because it's rigorous, it's fast, it's changing instrument, it's changing like the registers and all that. But essentially, there is a build-up to that direction that enables the composer to give you jollity not right away as an emotion, but building up to it with those beautiful, fast-moving 16 notes and something that you may not be aware of if it's like if you don't have a score in front of you. It's in a 2/4 and not a 4/4 because that makes it even like tighter, if I may say.
Yeah, and actually, one thing I want to add to what Nikos was just talking about with the idea of emotion is one of the biggest points that we made in our previous episode about Mercury, the Winged Messenger, is we were talking about the idea of horoscopes and the idea of, many people, especially, younger generations, have access to applications like CoStar or maybe like full stream astronomical, applications that actually track the planets in terms of their rotation, where they're located, or where they are in their orbit. And a lot of like social interactions and mental interactions, both personally and socially, like revolve around the location of the planets and where they are. So we were talking about how for a lot of people like around our age, they're familiar with this concept of Mercury retrograde and how that tends to affect a lot of social situations. So it's interesting how Holst has this movement of jollity right after that sense of like retrograde, where, we don't get there immediately, but when we do, we have this immediate shift of where we once were. And this similar sense of, going to one emotion from another takes time, is something that we've also talked about in previous episodes, how when we have, this opening movement of Mars, the bringer of war, and then going into the bringer of peace, and how it's not really peaceful right away, but we get there eventually. That same kind of device is used here. We have the sense of jollity that we can identify clearly, but it still takes time in the music and in real time to kind of get there, which is interesting to see how he used that device in different fashions.
Yeah, kind of like the same thing that we were talking about between Mars and Venus. Venus is not bringing peace and stability right away. It eventually does. Kind of the same thing, like we have jollity, but not right off the bat in the same way that it's happening later into the piece. So I'm going to drive it a little forward now. Now that we mentioned that is a good pass for talking about the next section. We have many different ideas like melodies here in the piece. Now, at some point, we shift to a 3/4 measure and like a 3/4 meter, and the first measure is like pum 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 pum, like that. It's kind of a jolly, as everything is, but in a different way. So I guess the composer is just outlining many different ideas that are unified by the same affect, but are like different shades of jollity. Now this I would associate with the meter. I would associate with a dance. Naturally, it's kind of the same topic, or the instruments are again the horns starting that, then the winds, then the strings eventually, and it reaches a climax, which is a big one, and it goes faster and faster, and it's that jollity that starts getting out of control. Would you feel that for that piece?
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually one of like the major notes I had when I was like analyzing this myself. Like the whole piece has some type of notion that suggests some type of dance-like feeling to it. And, that 3/4 meter obviously insinuates the idea of a waltz, and that's reinforced by the light texture that the various instruments playing have. We have basically pizzicato strings that are just playing on major downbeats. A lot of like the woodwinds are playing in the upper register or some type of lower register, maybe in a lighter tone. So we really are set up for some type of like, swaying feel that, you would hear in dance music, but also without the heaviness that suggests, like maybe a different emotion. It's interesting how he set it up that way.
So Nick was talking, and I was talking, but about the alienating elements of all those movements and the suite as a whole. So here's what's alienating. So I guess the dance and all that jollity that come before that is kind of a more human, relatable place to be. You would associate jollity with tempo, with meter, with orchestration, and all that, and that you would be correct. Now, what's happening is that he attempts to abruptly like stop that sequence, go faster and faster and faster and faster, and suddenly he gives a huge tutti forte for all the instruments in the orchestra except some percussion, and then he starts again like pum pum, and then he slows down. He goes into a more mystical place with a subdued lower register, and then he starts building something completely different. And this is something that we haven't seen in the piece, that is driving it and driving and driving to some kind of jollity and dance and loco, kind of movement. I mean, you would actually probably see that in the score, but then something completely different happens.
Yeah, and actually, I wanna I wanna share a personal thought I had with that pum 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 little melody. So anyone who's listening who might be a gamer like myself, um, you may think like that sounds so familiar, and that's because it's nearly the exact same structure and harmonic contour as the Lost Woods theme from Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. And it's interesting how that melody from Ocarina of Time mimics this because it's the exact same idea. It represents the Lost Woods, which is like this really mysterious place, and obviously it's in the home of like the Kokiri in the game, which are basically humans that never grow up. They always live their full lives as kids, and it's meant to be very mischievous and very upbeat in nature. So it's interesting to see and maybe think about the idea. Maybe that was derived from this sense of jollity in this orchestral suite that was written over 100 years in advance, or maybe not over 100 years, maybe more like 70 or 80 years. But it's interesting to think about that relation. And obviously, the music from the planets is used in various other forms of media, not just in video games. So it's interesting to draw that parallel. That was just an immediate thought I had listening to the piece, this most recent run.
So there's probably a topic that is shared. It has to do with something mystic or something that is jolly, but in a way that is not. It's kind of. It also has a shadow, and that's kind of an apparent shadow. So big intervals, fast moving big intervals, pop 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 pop, pop, like using the entire range. It's something that's tripping fast, like going like very quickly into the forest, like Nick said, or wherever that is. The point is that it's moving from one idea to the other. It's kind of a bridge into the piece. And then the composer chooses to associate jollity, and that's probably our centerpiece of this discussion, with like an anthem, like a hymn, and a very well known, like a very well structured one, like a national anthem or something patriotic, like a totally different topic that you probably wouldn't expect to be here at all after those fast moving 16th notes or after that 3-4 meter. So I mean, that's the 3-4 meter, but it's like slow, and the instruments are moving like in a direction that everybody could be able to associate with something totally different, probably jolly, happy, but also like pride, also like the sense of like something higher. They're committed to something higher, and suddenly we hear that and we feel happy in a totally different way than the first three themes of the piece. What do you think about that?
I fully agree. I actually want to take the idea of a hymn and segue into something that Nikos and I are going to love talking about. So, as I mentioned, Nikos and I, we share that this is our favorite movement of the work. And one of the biggest reasons for that is actually the middle section. So, in the middle section, we switch back to 3/4. We go into the key of E flat major at the Andante Maestoso. But the reason for this is because of the melody here. So some of you will already know this melody. It goes like this. And it's absolutely beautiful. Chances are you've played this on the piano. You might have heard this in a film, or maybe you heard it incorporated into another work. But what's interesting about what Nikos just said is that this is actually a hymn. It stands alone as a hymn. I can't remember the name off the top of my head. But Holst incorporates this hymn that is about the same idea, there's a sense of bringing joy and finding joy in Christ the Lord. And he incorporates that beautifully into the piece. So we hear it in this middle section, and then at the very end, where we have these long, 16, 17 note runs throughout the woodwinds, the low brass re-emphasize this in the key of G sharp minor. Um, and it's just interesting to see this application of this hymn, and like Nikos and I can talk about this whole section on itself for probably forever.
So it's a very beautiful section, and it's our favorite. What we really love about it, it's the contour of the melody, which actually exists in the beginning of the piece. Pa 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 pa. So that's the first. The first two intervals are the same, but then he uses the same uh, compositional elements, like the same melodic small components here or there, to create something different. I guess he's trying to tell the story of how joy and jollity have different shades and can be expressed in numerous ways. And what is interesting about that is also the key, which is E flat major. And it's, I mean, we had C, we had D major, G major also, we had a C minor small transition, and then we go to E flat, which I don't know what kind of joy he's thinking about, but he's very successful. I feel that this key is used in many hymn-like moments into the past, and he knows that, and he wants us to know that, and we probably, if we lived in his time as a British audience or whatever, we might be aware of that as well.
Yeah, actually, giving another musical example of like how this is recognizable. When we first started planning this podcast and really putting together our thoughts in terms of how we would do it and how we go about it, I played for Nikos a version of, there's a choral piece called Homeward Bound. Chances are, if you were a middle school choir, you've sung this piece or you've heard it before. Absolutely beautiful piece by Marta Keene. So, Vocal Point, an a cappella group based out of Brigham Young University, or BYU, they have a rendition of Homeward Bound performed with the All-American Boys Chorus. And the arranger, their director, McKay Crockett, he actually incorporated that main melody, that dee 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 dee, in the exact same key into that arrangement. And it's a beautiful use. So it's really interesting to see. And that was arranged, by the way, in like 2012 or 2014. It's like almost 8 or 9 years old, I believe now. So it's interesting to see how that sense of joy of going home was used in that piece. And I'm sure, like Nikos just said, it was really an application of Holst trying to allow all audiences and listeners and players, for that matter, to find joy within that section. Very interesting to think about.
So he presents us with this idea, which again it uses the same kind of elements of the melody, and those exist previously. And then I'm very interested to talk to you about what is happening with the form, like the overall structure of the piece, which is like he begins with that theme, so that's theme one. Then the second theme is, that's the second theme. And then the third is like da 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 da, and that is actually the fourth theme that we hear. So after that, he goes back and does it all again from the top in different keys, and that's so amazing because this is I don't know what is the narration. I mean, we're talking about this right now, but it's also kind of an absolute music way to think about the structure of the piece. It's not like a symphonic poem, abstract structure. You could say that it's like, in my notes, I would say, and I might be wrong, it's like a 1, 2, 3, and then a B section indicating like the middle of the piece, and then going back to A1 prime, A2 prime, A3 prime, and B prime. So even the B section is re-examined for a brief moment towards the ending. But what's interesting is that he's actually pressing restart, only this time there's different orchestration. There is a different pattern in terms of like modulations from keys to keys. He wants to eventually go back to C major, which was the key that was started in, and the probably the center of the entire piece, if you could say that there is something like that. But it's kind of a mirror structure with the anthem in the middle. Isn't that amazing?
It is, and it really connects to a topic we've been talking about in our seminar, which is the idea of gesture. How, with the use of like specific intervals, with the use of like these fast, light moving melodies, we're really given this gesture of jollity itself, this gesture of happiness, which, is reinforced by the stark contrast of some of the heavier themes and topics that we've talked about, not only in the piece, but in the past few episodes of the podcast. So it's interesting to see how, in the end, he reinforces all those topics in a new fashion, in a new harmonic language, but still maintains that rhetoric of lightness and maintains the gesture of what he's trying to do to reinforce jollity. So one last big topic I want to talk about with you, Nikos, is when we were discussing this piece, because like I said, we've gone into very deep detail about this piece. Right. Nikos was telling me about how some orchestras and some directors, they'll actually stop performing the planets after this movement, that they'll only do the first four, they won't do the other three that remain after. So I kind of want to talk to Nikos about what we think about that. Like, if you were to go to perform this piece, or go to hear this piece, and you only hear the first four movements, do you think you'll have different takeaways than if you were to hear all seven?
For sure. Number one, this piece ends on a very big, like, bum. Like, so it's happy, and it carries that overall affect all the way. So it's jolly through the end, and not every movement does that in the same way. But this one is. So if you end there, that's kind of a happy ending, actually. So sometimes when people started performing this work in the United Kingdom back in the day, like in the early 20s, conductors would think that the entirety of the work was too much for audiences to comprehend. Now, British audiences were used to massive works, but they were not particularly trained into deep thinking, like outside of absolute music, like symphonies, variations, suites without any extra musical meaning assigned to them. So many conductors were thinking, okay, 4 movements, fast, slow, scherzo, fast, and like ending on a high low, like a Beethoven symphony. And that's what they did. They cut the last movements, which are actually a little more eloquent in orchestration and forces in some aspects. So that may be also a reason. But I think it's kind of philosophical, and it's very interesting that you bring it up, and it's very interesting to think about it, because then the composer, what he said was that I don't want to end with Jupiter, because that's giving the sense, the feeling of a happy ending. And the Neptune, which is movement number 7, spoiler alert, does not have the same kind of a happy ending. So he said at some point that, life in general does not have a happy ending, because its ending is death. And then it's all about like the experience that you may have after that, or everything that's again beyond our understanding, out of this world. And ending with jollity is like saying, okay, your life ends on a high note when you're like 25 years old and you're out in a party, or you're dancing, or you're finding your first love, or you're patriotic about like kind of the main theme, like the main anthem. So ending with that is like saying, well, that's it. That's all about life is, without thinking about mystics, without thinking about the old age, without thinking about dark forces that come after that. We start with war, then you have peace, then you have that beautiful Mercury intermezzo, and then we end on a high note, and we're all good, right? Well, according to the composer, no. He wants the actual experience of the whole 7 movements, and there is like an emotional experience that he wants us to feel all the way for 48 minutes straight.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing that. It's very interesting to think about, because when I first started thinking about this, when Nikos first told me about this, I couldn't help but think about it. I mean, him and I are both vocalists. Like, I'm a composer, he's a conductor, so that's kind of like the main lens that we're kind of looking at this from. And, I couldn't help but try and think about, performing large-scale works like requiems, or like some type of like, major work like that have just as deep of meanings as this piece, but stopping it partway through, or only doing select like movements or like pieces from that. It's a totally different experience, and it can't help, but make you wonder why, or how, like, did they go about that decision. So I'm sure Holst thought about the same thing when he heard renditions of this that were just ending on this happy note. Now, of course, like there are situations in life where they do end on a happy note, and then that's that. But I think for the deeper meaning, like Nico said, it's very important to reinforce that these 7 movements are connected in deeper ways that we do and do not know about. So it's good to just experience them in their full capacity. All right. I think this is the end of it for today. Thank you all for tuning in to our episode on Jupiter, the bringer of Jollity. As we said, this is our favorite episode by far. Looks like our longest one too.
Thank you for tuning in with us. This has been Nikos.
This is Nick. Thank you for tuning in to episode 4 of Out of This World.
And you'll see you for the 5th one.
We will talk to you all very soon. Take care.